Hi, everybody. This is Jacob Sapochnik with the Enchanting Lawyer podcast. Welcome to the show. Before we start our show today, we have a very interesting episode. I wanted to thank our listeners. I'm beginning a lot of emails recently thanking me for the show and for innovative ideas that we offer our listeners, professional attorneys. And that's my goal, to bring some different content that will help you improve your practice and just make you think different. And today I'm honored to have Jay Baer on the show. Jay is an expert marketing consultant. He's a speaker, author. He's the author of Youtility, Why Smart Marketing is About Help, Not Hype. He's the founder of Convince and Convert, one of the top leading marketing blogs in the U.S. And he also has a podcast, Social Pros. He's been one of the top 3 marketing experts in the U.S. Jay, welcome to the show. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me, Jacob. I'm delighted to be here and speak to all my attorney friends out there.
And Jay, just before we started the show, I was telling you that I've been using the utility concept for the past year. It's been really helpful and completely changed my legal practice. And every time I talk to attorneys that I feel that are stuck, I always mention your book.
Thank you.
And it's always kind of interesting when I explain. They say, "Well, what do you mean? But what is utility? What?" Well, I try to explain it the way I understand it, and of course today I want to ask you some interesting questions about that. But it just, people are still very, very afraid to share information, and so before we dive into the content of the show, I'm hoping that many of my listeners know who you are, but I know that some of them are not familiar with your work, and perhaps give us a little intro about your background and what brought you here today.
Sure, you bet. Thank you. And thank you for recommending the book. I have been in online marketing almost since the beginning, since 1994-3. And my current consulting firm, Convince and Convert, is the 5th marketing services company I've started during that period. And so I've seen a lot of changes. And one of the things I've noticed is that it gets a lot harder to reach people with your messages now, because TV is totally fractured. Nobody really pays attention to print like they used to. Terrestrial radio is being displaced by satellite radio, et cetera. And then you have this like incredible array of options to reach people online, where consumers and customers are spending more and more of their time. But it's tough online, right? Because you're competing not just against other attorneys for attention, you're competing against everything, right? You're competing against Kim Kardashian and everything else. It's pretty tough. And so I discovered a few years ago that one of the best ways to succeed with modern marketing is not to try and be amazing, but to just be useful. That if you create resources, information, tools that are truly and inherently useful, that people will pay attention to you, right? That we actually want things that are useful, that help us. And what we say in the book is that we're essentially replacing top of mind awareness, which is what we've been shooting for 1,000 years, right? We're replacing top of mind awareness with friend of mind awareness. And so I call that concept of useful marketing utility, Y-O utility. And the definition of utility is that it's marketing so useful that people will pay for it, right? So think about that. It's marketing so useful that if you said, hey, would you give me money to receive this marketing, people would say, yeah, I actually would give you money to receive that, which obviously is much different than how we've handled marketing historically. So it's marketing that people actually cherish instead of what we've been doing for 1,000 years, which is making marketing that people simply tolerate. And that goes double or triple for the legal industry. So my company does a lot of consulting with big organizations. We work with Walmart and Oracle and Allstate and Cabela's and Best Buy and people like that to help them make this transformation from shouting louder to providing really, really useful information. I have 4 books now that I've written, 3 about the utility concept and 1 about social media's impact on business. And it's a really exciting time to be in business, to be in marketing, but it's also a really difficult time because things are changing very, very quickly, and most companies just are not ready to make that change yet. You are, and I'm glad that you are, but a lot of people aren't yet, as I'm sure you're discovering.
Right. And I totally agree with that. One of the things that I've noticed, and when I was working with and following people in the marketing area just to learn myself, is that I see that they divide into two groups. There are people that really understand what's happening, they follow the pulse, and there are people that just copy and they amplify what others are saying. And in your case, I mean, I just wanted to give you my opinion that I feel that you are kind of like an innovator, because you really found the concept and you've developed it, and you said, this is what it is. That's my thing. How I decided to identify it, and you build this whole concept of utility, and people are amazed with it, and I've seen people copy it in a way, kind of change some things, but you're the first one who kind of put that your foot, say, this is what it is, and that's how we should be marketing now. Otherwise, people are going to be closing the doors. And you said big companies, they realize it now, and service providers are still kind of behind. But before we get into the utility concept, I wanted to first of all congratulate you on two things. You in the past 2 weeks you launched your podcasting search engine,
Yeah.
and utility for real estate, which is a vertical of that concept we just talked about. So, first of all, congratulations on that.
Thanks.
And that has been probably a crazy time to do this launch. Two
Yeah.
things.
I don't recommend launching two major things within a week, but that's kind of how it happened, and it worked out fine. The book is great. Utility for Real Estate has turned out fantastic, and the search engine, marketingpodcasts.com, it's called, and it's a place that you can find marketing podcasts. So you obviously listen to this one, but you may be interested in other podcasts about marketing, even other podcasts about legal marketing. You can go to marketingpodcasts.com and find interesting shows for free. And I built that site just based on personal frustration, right? For no other reason. I was looking for some other marketing podcasts that I wanted to listen to. Several of my friends have podcasts, but I'm always looking to see what else is out there. And I was trying to find other shows, and it was impossible, right? If you go to iTunes and look for other podcasts, it's a hot mess. It's terrible. Some of the other podcasting apps like Stitcher and some of those other ones, they kind of have the ability to do discovery, but not really. And so I thought, geez, this is almost 2015. It's kind of crazy that there isn't a way to do this. And I said, well, maybe there is, and I'm just not familiar with it. So I did a bunch of research and said, okay, well, surely, of course, there's a search engine for marketing podcasts, right? And it turns out there wasn't at all. And I said, well, that's just insane. So for reasons that probably don't make a lot of strategic sense, but just because I'm like, this is stupid, I'm going to do this. My developing team, Marketing Press in Phoenix, and myself went out and built it. So we built the very first search engine for marketing podcasts, and it's going great. And we're thinking about maybe next year expanding it to have sort of business podcasts, TV podcasts, comedy podcasts, et cetera. Now that we have the sort of framework implemented, we could probably expand it out across other verticals. So it's kind of fun.
And I've been playing around with it. It's just very, it's so easy. It's just so easy to look at it. Just simple, very, very. Again, why nobody thought about it before?
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. Well, I never thought about it before either. So I guess I'm part of the problem, not just the solution.
And people keep asking me. I've had my podcast almost a year now. Why do you podcast? What's the point of doing this? And I wanted to ask you first of all, before we dive into the actual utility concept. Yep. Why should anybody who is in business have a podcast, and what's the value of this medium?
Well, I think it's the question applies to both sides of the conversation, right? Having a podcast is a utility because you are giving away what you know to your audience in a way that they will find valuable enough that they would theoretically pay for it, right? People who love your show, and there's a lot of them, would they pay you to get the show? Absolutely. They don't have to. You're giving it away for free, but they would pay you to get the show. This show is a utility, right? It is marketing so useful that people would pay for it. Now, are all the people listening to the show potential clients of yours? No, they're not. But there is other benefits to you hosting the show, producing the show, right? There's industry awareness benefits. There's potential cooperation with other attorneys benefits. Other good things happen to you. Maybe you want to write a book someday, and now you've got an audience because of the podcast, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So podcasts are very much part of the utility playbook. And I am bullish on podcasts overall for a couple of reasons. One, it allows you to build a more kind of visceral, nuanced relationship with the listener than blogging does. Like I've got a very successful blog. We have 250,000 visitors a month or something like that, and it's gone great. But anecdotally, many more people come up to me and say, "I listen to your show," than say, "I read your blog." Even though mathematically, way more people read the blog than listen to the podcast. The podcast, because they can hear you, right? It appeals on a different sensory level. So the podcast is really effective at building relationships and bridges that sort of transcend time. And then the other thing is just based on consumer behavior, right? Podcast listenership has increased 25% in the United States in the last year. In 1 year, 25% increase. To the point that now 15% of all Americans ages 12 or above have listened to a podcast in the last 30 days. 15% of this country has listened to a podcast in the last month. Now, you might think, well, geez, 15% isn't that much. Well, let me break it down a different way. 18% of Americans are on Twitter. And nobody's saying, well, that doesn't have a future. That's a niche play. There's no sense doing that, right? So when you start breaking it down, 15% of a country the size of America is a lot of people and a ton of opportunity. So especially when you're in a business like law, where you have things that require conversations and insights and detail. I mean, there's a lot to it. Podcasts are a great way to sort of get behind the scenes and really have in-depth conversations.
Right, and especially with the future, they're going to have cars with built-in podcast options.
That's right.
Right?
That's why, and that's what's powering that 25% increase. You're exactly right. And actually there's research on that from Edison, the market research company, that shows it's an incredible shift. Last year in 2013, a majority of the podcasts listened to in this country were on a laptop. 1 year later, the majority were listened to on a mobile device. And so you've got some great mobile podcast apps now for iOS and Android. But the bigger issue, Jacob, is that now with 4G LTE, you can stream audio pretty much anywhere. You don't need to be connected to Wi-Fi, right? You can just stream it through your regular data plan. And that has made podcast listening infinitely more accessible to people. And the great thing about podcasts, I just did an article for Fast Company about this, that it's one way for professionals in any industry, law, real estate, whatever, to multitask, right? You can be driving and learning. You can be working out and learning. You can be walking the dog and learning. And most of the other forms of marketing education or business education, you've got to be focused on that, right? It's really hard to drive yourself to work and read a magazine. Right. So That's one of the other things. As we get busier and busier, podcasts get more appealing because you can multitask while you listen to them.
And in my mind, I think, and that's a feeling that I have, is that listeners to the show are more loyal than blog readers. And I get emails sometimes from people in other countries who listen to my show, and they say, well, we get together, 4 or 5 of us every Monday to get your episode, and we listen to it. And I've never had that with a blog. I mean, nobody said, well, wait for your blog to come out on Monday and just read it. But with a podcast,
right.
It just feels like because it's a personal thing. They listen to me. It's I'm in their ears. I'm talking to them as if they're one person.
Yes.
And it's just I'm excited about it. So Jay, I wanted to. I'm very excited to talk about Youtility right now. It's to me the biggest thing about that concept is helping is the new selling in a way. But helping, we do it because we really want to help. So why don't you kind of give me a little overview of Youtility and first of all why you wrote it, and then we'll go. I broke it down to some principles that I'm curious about.
Yeah, I wrote the book somewhat. Let me see if I have any. Give me just a second. I'll be right back. Hold on.
We're having a live demo here. Jay is going to show us something.
Okay, I'm back. Yeah. This is the true story of where this idea came from. So it was, let's say, 4 years ago. I was in Canada, and I was up there with my family. My son's a hockey player. We were in hockey camp in Canada, and after the camp, we were driving across Canada, and we went to Banff, which is a lovely tourist town in Alberta in the Canadian Rockies. And there's tons and tons of bars and restaurants there, lovely area, lots and lots of taxi drivers. But there was one taxi driver in that town who was a Youtility, and his name is Taxi Mike. And once a quarter, he puts together, I'll show this here for people who are watching the video, he puts together this thing, which is the Taxi Mike's where to eat dining guide for Banff. You can see this is not this is not a professional graphic design production, right? I mean, he just like knocks this out himself. But he prints this out and he hands it out all over town. And when you're up there, you'll see this on all the front counters all over town. And it says right on the cover, there's a map of downtown. And then inside, he categorizes all the different places. So best bar, best sports bar, best place for cheap drinks, etc. He's like a one-man trip advisor, essentially. And at the end of the night, you're trying to find a way home. And right on the cover, it says, "Oh, Banff Taxi." And here's his phone number, right? So I saw this when I was up there 4 years ago, and I'm like, wow, this is really fascinating because this guy drives a cab, but yet he's gone to the trouble of making this whole guide to the city. You know, this has nothing to do with driving a cab, right? It's a much bigger story. It's so useful. It's so helpful. I'm like, gosh, you know, I would pay for this. In fact, people do all the time because they buy, you know, Fodors and Frommers and all those kind of, you know, travel guides. And I thought this is really fascinating. And when I was going home on the plane, when I got all the way home, I started thinking, oh, geez, I wonder if there's other people that are making, you know, kind of useful marketing like this to just give away things that are useful. And so I started to look around and I found several other examples. I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. And a couple of months later, I was giving a speech at the very first Content Marketing World Conference. And they assigned me to do like a 10-minute session, like a burst session, like almost a TED Talk. And they said, come up with a concept. And I didn't have anything. And I thought, geez, I wonder if this useful marketing idea could be something to talk about. I think there really is a trend here as I started to look around. And I was in the shower about 3 weeks before the conference. And the word and the phrase utility just popped into my head. It just like, popped into my head. And so I said, oh, that's what I'm going to call it, and did that 8 or 10 minute session, and it went great. And then it became a keynote speech, and then it became a book, and then a series of books. And now Youtility is part of the marketing program for many of the largest companies in the world, and lots of attorneys and accountants and realtors and restaurants and everything else. So, but it all started being in Banff and picking up one of these little yellow pieces of paper.
And you know, this example about Taxi Mike is so interesting to me because it tells people it's so low tech. You don't need that much money to do this. You know, people say, "Oh, I don't have money to advertise, and I wish I could do." You don't need to. You know, look,
this is like 10 cents.
Right.
I mean, there's nothing to this.
Yeah. So for anybody who says, "Well, we can't do it, we can't afford it," you know, this come back and say, "Well, you know, look at this guy," and he
okay.
You know. So
there's an example from the real estate book that I put out last week, Youtility for Real Estate. There's a lady, her name is Holly Beckman, and she is a leasing consultant for a company called W.H. Smith in Washington, D.C., and she also has her own consulting business where she helps people find the perfect apartment, right? So she just pays attention to Twitter, just listens, spends about 10 minutes a day on this, and looks for searches for people saying things like, I hate my roommate, or expensive Washington, D.C. apartments, right? So she's got a bunch of phrases she set up. When people say something like that, she just answers them back and says, hey, yeah, roommates can be a hassle. If you ever want to get your own place, let me know. Here's my blog that has tons and tons of great resources. And by the way, I help people find the perfect apartment. So within the first 2 months of doing that, 10 minutes a day on Twitter, which costs her $0, she generated $144,000 in new leases.
Right.
Just by being helpful.
Mm-hmm. And just taking the time and thinking about it.
Yeah.
So the book has so many good concepts, both, you know, your vertical books and this one. And I've taken a few of them just so I think it will apply to our audience and our listeners. The first one that I thought is, you mentioned if you sell something, you make a customer today. But if you help somebody, you make a customer for life. And what did you mean by that? And maybe a good example to support that.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately what we're trying to do, what we should be trying to do, is build those customer relationships for life. Either because those customers may be so delighted with you because you help them up front that they want to do business with you over and over and over again. Although in some cases, in some parts of the law, you hope that people only have that problem once, right? I think
Right.
you're in
Of
I think
course.
you're in immigration
Immigration
law.
law, yes.
They're probably only going to immigrate once, hopefully. If it's not necessarily let's come back to Jacob. Now I want to move to a different country.
Right.
But that has a big implication for loyalty and retention and referrals too, right? If you really help somebody and you say, look, let me give you a lot of tips on how to do immigration, and if by the way you still need help, come to me, Jacob. That kind of trust that
Right.
builds, giving away value, builds a bond of trust that ultimately will increase the referrals that those people give you because they feel a kinship with you, right? They feel
Right.
like they owe you something. And that is a really, really different way to do business because historically, right, we've thought of business as in purely transactional terms. We find a customer, we sell them something, we move on to the next customer. What Youtility does is sort of gives you a playbook for thinking about customer value over a long period of time. That the referral that you get 3 years down the road is massively important, and trust is what creates those referrals.
Is this what you mean by the concept of marketing sideways, where you basically you provide helpful information, not necessarily to sell it to them directly?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good example of marketing sideways.
Right.
Marketing sideways is utility that transcends the transaction, right? So,
Right.
in a real estate example, it might be giving away information that's not about houses, right? In a law example, it would be giving away information that's not about law.
Right.
That's one of the things that businesses struggle with, in particular, knowledge businesses, right? Like attorneys.
Right.
They think, well, I'm an attorney, therefore I can only tell you about law, and that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of other things that you have expertise on that you can use to get people aware of you and to sort of build some of those trust bridges,
Right.
And then eventually talk about law if they need that. But you don't have to just talk about how to hire a taxi. You can talk about all the different places that you could go in that city.
I'll give you an example. What I've done after I read your book is I've decided to build an app, and the app we called it Citizenship Pal. And what it is, it's basically you can get it on the iPhone, iTunes. It allows people that are studying for the citizenship exam. I put all the questions in there. So even though I'm not in the business of teaching people how to pass the citizenship exam, we help them get citizenship by finding the legal paperwork.
Yeah.
I put all the questions in there and the answers. So when they sit for the exam and study for it, whether they're in the waiting room or before the exam, they can just swipe through the phone and everything's right there. And
Oh, that's such a great example. I love that. I'm going to use that in my speeches. You
it's
got to send me some
perfect. And you know what?
screenshots.
The funny thing about this, Jay, is when I put it on iTunes, I on the store, I gave it to clients that are using it, and we have a very large Facebook page for our law firm. It's actually the largest in the world for attorneys. So when I announced it on the app, there are people who are not just my clients, there are other lawyers. And I start hearing that other lawyers are giving this app to their clients so they can study for the exam. My app. Do you see what I mean? So
That's so
not
great.
only I help other people,
Yeah.
but now these other professionals who are competing with me per se, they're recommending my app because it's the easiest thing out there to study for the
Yep.
exam. Nobody
love
else
it.
is doing it. Do you see what I mean? So
Yep.
it's funny because I didn't do anything in the app to make myself like salesy, say use me as the attorney. I didn't want to do that because I knew if I do that, none of the other professionals are gonna be able to recommend the app. And now
Yes.
it's just become another utility. People say, well, you want to study for the questions, just go to get Citizenship Pal. Very easy, catchy name, and they study for the exam.
Yeah, I love it. I
And that
love
was,
it. And what some people would say was, well, geez, Jacob, that's great, but how do you actually make money at that? If you don't have your name in there, if it doesn't have links to your firm, then why do that at all? Like, why you're just wasting time, right? That's the question that
Right.
people will ask. And so what do you tell them? I know what I would tell them because I wrote the book about it, but what would you tell them?
Well, what I would tell them is that when people see there's just my logo when they open it, so they know it's powered by our law office, but there's nothing else, nothing else. And what I tell them is that it's so useful. People just come back and call me and say thank you for this resource. We didn't have that before. That I believe that in the future, if they will need an attorney, they may remember me, the guy who built the Citizenship Pal. And that's it. That's all I want. I want to be able to be out there to provide value. So eventually, they'll know that I'm the attorney who provides value.
Exactly. You said the magic word, which is eventually. The biggest problem with business today, Gary Vaynerchuk has said this in the past, and I'll paraphrase him here, is that everybody wants to be a hunter and nobody wants to be a farmer. Everybody wants to create revenue and customers right now, instead of saying, look, if somebody becomes a customer or gives you a referral or tells somebody about you word of mouth style, eventually that's okay. And one of the key things that I keep emphasizing when I'm doing speeches or in the book is that you have to embrace the power of eventually. And everybody wants to be a hunter, nobody wants to be a farmer. And if there's one thing that Youtility is, I think it's the playbook for being a farmer.
Correct. And I think people who understand that are going to be able to be more successful because they're going to change the way they do business. It requires a change. It happened to me as well because I wasn't thinking like that. I was thinking more as I was always on the defense. I got to get clients. I got to do this. Now I'm more of, let's just give it all away. Let's just give this away. And that brings me to the next concept. You say that today relationships are more often created with information, not with people. And you say you have to over communicate almost everything.
Yeah.
The example you gave in your book was Marcus, right? That's how he did. This is I don't know if you want to tell the little story. You probably tell it better.
So, there's a couple of issues here. One is that, well, let me ask it this way first. This is so incredibly important for the legal community to understand. And I've worked with attorneys in the past and done marketing for them, and it's always about making the phone ring or making somebody fill out that email contact form, right? That's the whole name of the game. We used to spend, at one point, I was spending on behalf of an attorney client, large firm, personal injury, we were doing about $2.5 million a month in Google AdWords just to make the phone ring. Now that goes back a long time. But here's the thing. Everybody listening right now has been on many websites, not just one, many websites, and you were actually interested in whatever they were selling, whatever the product or service was, but you purposefully did not call or did not fill out the contact us form because you didn't want to be hassled, right? You didn't want somebody to call you back and email you immediately and get into that kind of conversation, not because you didn't like the company, but because you just weren't ready yet. See, it used to be the way business has been done forever until 5 years ago is that you would call very early in the process and have a conversation with somebody or go face-to-face or something like that or set up an appointment, and you would sort of educate yourself in a conversation with other people. Now we're so busy, we would prefer to educate ourselves. Then once we are fully educated, what I call self-serve information in my books, once you're fully educated and you can't find any more information yourself, then and only then do you call or fill out the email form. So what that means is that your average potential customer knows way more about you than they used to by the time they contact you, which is actually a good thing. The other piece about it is if you think you have enough information about your practice online, you almost assuredly do not. You almost assuredly do not, right? And what I tell people all the time is that if somebody has to call you to make a decision about whether or not to hire you, you're doing it wrong. Right? Your goal should be that somebody could basically press a button and say, hire attorney, pay with PayPal, add to cart, right? That you have educated them so much that they could literally buy from you without ever having a conversation. And the reason this trend has changed, right? The reason that's information first and people second now is that we have access to information like never before, right? Everybody's carrying a phone, so they can access information whenever they want. So Google has a bunch of research on this that shows that the amount of information that people need on average before making any decision, right, from attorney to chicken sandwich, has doubled, right? We need twice as much information as we ever did before. And so this is really, really hard for attorneys, right? Because what they believe in many cases is, look, I can't take what I know and put it on my website because then people know it and they don't have to hire me, right? They get completely freaked out about that, right? They can't make those two things match up. What do you tell them?
Well, one of the things that we've done is we start doing videos with a lot of content. So I think videos comes back to what you just said before. When somebody watches the video, very short videos, they call and say, we would like to meet with Jacob, and please send us the retainer. They're almost ready to retain. They just want to hear the validation. And so what we tell them is that people who, and I give you an example. When I just started my practice, I created an ebook. It was a 150-page book helping people to get visas, Canadians and Mexicans, to the U.S. We had the ebook, and people were buying the ebook. But almost 70% of the people who purchased the ebook, they came back to hire me as an attorney because it was just so much information. They said, well, we know everything about this visa, but we don't feel confident to do it. So we still want you to hire you because you're the expert every single time.
Yeah.
So the more content you give people, the more they want to come back to hire you because they feel comfortable that you know what you're saying.
Yeah, there's an example in the real estate book.
Yeah.
Joe Manusa, who has a brokerage in Tallahassee, Florida, and he specializes in representing sellers of homes that are $200,000 to $400,000. That's his sweet spot.
Right.
So at that price range, there's not usually a ton of money in it for the seller, and so a lot of times they're thinking, hey, maybe I shouldn't use a realtor at all. Maybe I should just sell this home myself and I could save the commission. So instead of convincing them that, no, you don't want to do that, you should hire us, he actually created an ebook very similar to yours, which is, here's how to sell your house yourself.
Yeah.
It's 65 pages, gave it away, just completely free, all over his website. Here's how to sell your house yourself. Here's step-by-step how to do it. And he says that almost every time somebody gets to about page 25 and is like, wow, this is way more work than I thought it was. I can't do this. I need a realtor. And they call him first, right? So telling people how to not hire him has produced way more customers than anything else.
Yeah, because people are not confident in themselves when they read information that is so complicated.
I don't have a law degree. I'm a smart guy. I don't have a law degree. I mean, I got, it's not really a do-it-yourselfer kind of circumstance usually.
And I think the biggest issue here is what if I made a mistake? When will I know it? And you know it really down the line, maybe 3, 4, 5 months in the future, you're going to find out if you messed up. It may be too late. You may pay more.
Yep. Yes.
And so people who are smart, they will buy the information because they want to know, but they will hire the professional later on based on the education. So this is the story of, the reason I mentioned Marcus Sheridan is because the content, the giving information, this is what saved his business because, I don't know if you want to tell the story briefly, but why content is so important.
Yeah, he was in a circumstance that a lot of us are faced with. And my friend Marcus Sheridan, who's a terrific marketing consultant now, and he also wrote the foreword to the main Youtility book, terrific foreword. And so in 2009, he almost went out of business. He's the co-owner of a company in Virginia called River Pools and Spas, and they do installation of in-ground fiberglass swimming pools. And some of you may remember 2009. It turns out that if you don't have enough money to pay your mortgage, you almost never want to buy a new swimming pool. Kind of a strange macroeconomic circumstance there. So they were in really big trouble. They were close to losing the business, almost missed payroll. And they said, what are we going to do? We've got to find a way to steal a disproportionate share of the tiny little bit of demand that still exists for pools. They didn't have any budget, certainly no incremental budget, small company. So they said, well, what if we just answered every question that anybody has ever asked us about pools? And nobody had a better idea. So they said, let's do that. So they started a blog, and they wrote 400 blog posts. And they wrote them at night, and they wrote them on the weekends because they still had a company to run, right? So they just sucked it up and said, look, every night from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., I'm writing 2 blog posts, and every Saturday I'm writing 2, and every Sunday I'm writing 2. And they wrote 400 posts, and every single one of those were literally an answer to a question that somebody had already asked them. Like, they already knew all the answers. It wasn't about knowing the answers. Right. It was that historically they'd given all those answers away word of mouth, either on the phone or face to face. They said, well, let's just write it all down. So they did. They now have over 1,000 blog posts on their site. And not only did River Pools and Spas survive, they thrived. They now get more website traffic than any other swimming pool related website in the world, in the entire world. And today, of their customers, the average new customer reads 105 pages of their website before making a purchase. 105 pages. So that's why I say if you think you've got enough information, you probably don't. And 85% of their customers, 85%, buy a swimming pool without ever having a sales conversation, right? Buy a swimming pool without ever talking to somebody and having a face-to-face or telephone conversation where it all has to be explained to them, because they have totally self-educated, right? They've read all the stuff like, okay, I want that pool with these options on this date. Here's the price. Boom. It is almost like you can't actually pay online. It's not like it's not Amazon, right? But the dynamics are the same, right? It's like, I know exactly what I want. Here it goes.
Right. And that's brings the concept of saying that this is a content that changes people's lives, and it's not pushing them to sell. It's actually improving their quality of understanding. That's the content that people should be producing today.
Yeah, I mean, if you just tell the truth and just explain what it is that you do, whether or not to buy from you or hire from you will become self-evident.
Right.
And here's the thing that Marcus talks about a lot in his speeches, which is really smart. Which is being really transparent about price and talking about what things cost and why you might not be the right solution. Because this is particularly true in the legal world. You don't want more calls. Like, hear me what I'm saying. You don't want more calls. You want the right number of calls from people who are the right customer for you.
Absolutely.
Right. And so many attorneys and law firms spend so much time having conversations or consultations with people who will never, ever, ever be a client. It's not the right type of case. They don't have any money. They're not in the right jurisdiction. For any sort of number of circumstances, it's not right. So save yourself that time, save yourself that hassle by providing so much information about what you do and when you're the right circumstance and when you're not the right circumstance, that the people who do call you are definitely right for you. So if you're thinking about, well, geez, how is this going to make us money? Think about how much money you can save by not taking meetings with people who are never, ever, ever going to be a client.
Right. This is perfect, because most attorneys, they all they care about is the volume, phone ringing. It can ring all day. People who are not ready to hire you, what's the point? It's just a waste of time.
You have to, and this is a first step that I think people should, number one, start writing down the questions that people ask you, right? And start thinking about creating that content, right? Sort of the ultimate frequently asked questions document. That's the best way to get started with Youtility. Right. But for attorneys in particular, make sure you understand exactly what a meeting costs you, what a phone call costs you. Not necessarily in the acquisition cost, but in the time costs. If you're going to sit in a consultation with somebody for 30 minutes and you have assistant time or paralegal time or staff time or whatever, figure out what your total cost is to have that meeting. And every time somebody fills out that form or calls you, it's not necessarily a benefit to you, it's a cost. Unless they become a client, right? So understand what your true costs are. You said it right. Making the phone ring isn't the right objective.
Exactly. And attorneys, they think that because it makes them feel secure that the phone is ringing. But what's happening as a result is not always the what they need.
I want one good call a day, not 7 bad calls. Just
that's all
period.
we need.
Period.
That's all we need. Jay, as we come to the end of our show, I wanted you to perhaps share one thing with our listeners that they should be aware of or pay attention to as we come close to 2015.
Jacob, I think you said it earlier in the show, and I'm glad you mentioned it. I talked about this quite a bit in the real estate book that just came out, less so in the hardcover book because it came out a year ago, and that's the power of video. Increasingly, because people are on their mobile phones, because they have high-speed data plans, you can stream video just about anywhere. And video is so powerful, especially for professional services. We've got some great examples in the real estate book. And in fact, the Youtility for Real Estate ebook is only $2.99, even though there's not any law examples in there. The dynamics of hiring a realtor and the dynamics of hiring a lawyer are very similar psychologically. So look, for less than $3, I really suggest that people listening or watching the show grab it because you'll learn a lot from it. But find a way to communicate what you know in video, and you will really benefit. As I've been telling people for most of this year, you have to have a video strategy for 2015 and beyond. You just have to, because people are going to stop reading. Like as an author, it scares me to death, right? But people are going to stop reading because it's much easier and much faster to watch a video than it is to read. My kids don't read. They're smart. They don't read. They just watch videos. It's just that's the direction things are happening. I don't necessarily agree with it. Makes me feel like an old man, right? But that's the truth. And you have to find a way, and it doesn't have to be long videos. I mean, there's some great examples in the book about, short 15-second videos, 6-second videos. You can do some really interesting things with really, really tight mobile video. But regardless of how you do it, be thinking about a visual and video information strategy.
So 2015 video is going to rule.
I agree.
And Jay, when our audience, we're going to have links to your book in the show notes and your website as well. Do you want to share with us your website?
Sure. You can go to convinceandconvert.com. That's sort of our home base. The blog is there. You can get links to all the books. We also have a daily email called One Thing, which we send out links to really interesting digital, social media, content marketing resources once a day. So go to convinceandconvert.com and you can find all the other stuff that we do.
Perfect. And I'm going to make sure to link everything in our show notes.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jay, for coming on the show. It was a true pleasure, and we had a lot of good content here today. I'm very excited that you are here. And this is Jacob Sapochnik at enchantinglawyer.com. If you have any questions or comment about the show, please email to me, jacob@enchantinglawyer.com, and we'll see you at our next show.